Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to IWLA's live webinar, Cyber Risk is Business Risk, What Executives Need to Lead, scheduled to run today from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. My name is Bennett Judson. I'm the Meetings and Registration Coordinator at IWLA. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly address protocol for the webinar. During the webinar, all participants will be in lecture mode, and all participants' lines will be muted. Our presenters today will be taking questions during the presentation, so please use the Q&A button to submit any questions you may have. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers from Hartman Executive Advisors. Angela Czajkowski, Managing Director of Supply Chain, Construction and Real Estate, and Joshua von Rueden, Senior Director, Cybersecurity and Risk Management Services, Chief Information Security Officer. And with that, I'll hand the presentation over to Angela.
Thank you so much, Bennett. I appreciate it, and thank you to the IWLA for having us today. Josh and I are looking forward to walking through this journey with you. But first, just a quick note about Hartman. As Bennett mentioned, my name is Angela Czajkowski. I'm the Managing Director for Supply Chain, Construction, and Commercial Real Estate here at Hartman Executive Advisors. We're a fractional IT leadership and advisory firm. And what that means is that we work alongside executive leadership teams to help you make confident, practical decisions around technology. Oftentimes that means translating between strategy and systems, helping executives ask the right questions, reduce risk, and turn technology into a strategic enabler. I'm joined today by Josh von Rueden. Josh is our Senior Director of Cybersecurity and Risk Management Services here at Hartman Advisors, and he is also a Chief Information Security Officer. Now, we have a lot of content to cover today, and I promise you it is not intended to scare you, but rather to help you feel educated and informed, and frankly, empowered to make decisions after you leave this webinar. Quick note on the agenda, we're going to talk about the patterns that you should identify as it relates to cybersecurity and risk in your organization. We'll talk a bit more about your roles, what a good program looks like, how to test where you stand, and then most importantly, we want you leaving here today with some quick wins and concrete next steps. So let's get started. Why is cyber now an enterprise risk? Well, we say cyber belongs in the boardroom. Before we talk about threats and controls, I want to reset what kind of problem this really is. For a 3PL, cyber risk isn't an IT problem you delegate down the hall. It's a business continuity and customer trust problem that lands on this table, which is why we say this belongs in the boardroom. To frame that better, we're going to talk about operations first. What happens if your WMS or your TMS goes dark? Your docks back up, trucks wait, orders miss cutoff times. If we can't scan, we can't ship. And every hour of downtime results in detention charges, missed SLAs, and idle labor that you can't pay for. Next, we have the financial component. Ransom is the headline, but the real impact is recovery, forensics, breach notification costs, and these can amount to millions of dollars in some cases. Then you have the contract layer. So SLA penalties, indemnification clauses, these allow shippers to turn their loss into your liability. Lastly, we have the one that really outlasts the incident, which is customer trust. Shippers move to providers they can rely on. Think about that. A single disclosed breach can knock you out of RFPs and trigger security audits. Trust and reputation are slow to build, but fast to lose. So the decisions that contain this risk, budget, accountability, vendor standards, incident readiness, those decisions are made in this room, not in the server room. And that's why we're spending the next 60 minutes together. So let's talk about the data. The data supports this conversation and really the criticality of us having it at the executive level. So 283 attacks happened in 2025, targeted at the transportation and logistics sector. That's more than 2023 and 2024 combined. That trend is going in the wrong direction. We see a 34% year-over-year increase for targeted ransomware in this industry. And when we talk about recovery, we're not talking about hours. We're talking about weeks, even months. Logistics is in the crosshairs. And when you think about why, I think it's pretty simple. 3PLs are a high value target. Bad actors know that 3PLs can't tolerate downtime. Frankly, they count on it. Your vendors and your customers are your attack paths. A WMS provider, an MSP, a customer can become your outage. And your security perimeter is only as strong as your weakest connected partner. Now, we know that downtime can be existential. So thin operating margins do not absorb weeks offline. I think we can all agree that readiness defines whether this will be a disruption or a disaster. And lastly, customers can hold you liable. And we're going to talk about some cases here in a little bit where these impacts reared their heads in the real world and how we need to start thinking about them proactively. So it's not if, it's when, and we all need to be prepared. So Josh, I'm going to ask you to talk us through the 3 pillars for a mature program.
Thank you, Angela, and great start to the conversation. I think to begin, one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that there's 3 core pillars for everyone that thinks about a mature program. And the first is what I think most of us, sort of immediately jumps to mind, and that's the cybersecurity element. This is the defense against cybersecurity threats. These are the technical safeguards and controls. It's usually what we read about in the news. It's probably what dominates your conversations with your peers. And it's probably what keeps a lot of us up at night in terms of the impact that Angela was just describing with some of those trends. Importantly, though, it's only one of the 3 pillars. The second one, risk management, is an area that we're also going to talk about. And this is really where leadership lives. And this is risk at the enterprise level, and it certainly includes cybersecurity. But this is where senior leadership is able to guide the teams in the program and help decide what risks are acceptable and which are not. And this is something that you really can't outsource to IT. So this is where the senior leadership lives and spends a lot of its time. Examples of what this look like, tools that are typically used, and we'll talk more about this, are things called a risk appetite, which is sort of a guiding principle that the teams utilize to understand where to invest the limited resources to protect, and a risk register, which is a fantastic tool that lets us understand what risks we're seeing, which ones we need to talk about, and also what our decisions were in terms of how to tackle those, whether we're going to mitigate them, accept them, or some other decisions that we'll talk about. Areas of risk management also include things like vendor risk management, which we'll talk about, sort of that side door of risk where it's not us that gets attacked, it's our partners. It's our third-party suppliers themselves to us. And that's a key element. And one of the new innovations that we're all leveraging is AI, and that fits into this category as well. So this should be, and probably already is, front and center for many of your conversations. And then the third piece is compliance. And this is really, if we take a step back, thinking about it as proof of performance. This is validating that what should be happening is happening. This is helping protect us. So if a third party comes in, whether it's due to one of our contracts, insurance, an auditor of any kind, this is our way to show and demonstrate the great work that we're doing in the program that puts us into the most defensible state. And all these 3 pillars help us protect day to day on the cybersecurity side. You see at the bottom there, decide what risks we're going to focus on with our limited resources and to validate that those decisions are being executed. Another area that we want to frame, and this is a crucial framing as well, is that there's really 2 programs, or at least 2 disciplines, even if we don't want to think about it as its own distinct program. And you see on the left here, first, what we call the enterprise risk management, and then 2, IT security. And oftentimes what we find is that these are conflated, and we'll talk about why that's a risk in and of itself. By design, it builds risk into our programs, which we want to avoid. These should be 2 distinct functions or programs run by 2 different leaders, and they have 2 different jobs. Confusing them or collapsing them into a single person creates more risk by the design itself, and clearly that's what we want to avoid. Focusing on the left-hand side here, the enterprise risk management, The easiest way to think about this is what sits at the strategic layer, at the strategic altitude. You might hear me frame it, and led by executives or senior officers in the company. It focuses on strategic questions and it defines what we should be protecting against and to what levels. It sets the risk appetite for the team. These are leadership decisions, not technical decisions. Typically, it's led by, as we talked about, it could be a chief information security officer or other executive who operates at this space. And the reporting lines matter. It should not be technology. We don't want, and we'll talk about this more, but we don't want IT grading itself, right? This is sitting at that different altitude like we talked about. This is the holistic business risk view that takes into account cybersecurity. Onto the right-hand side, you see the IT security program. This is typically what most think about when they think about cyber risk, and this is typically where mistakes can be made. And it's, to the sort of the conversation will wind up, well, IT will handle that, or MSP is handling that. And that's all that it lives or where it lives. And often it'll just show up as a report card or a quarterly metric that we view. IT security program compared to enterprise risk that defines what to do. The IT security program is the how. It's the operations. It's the technical controls that live underneath those strategic decisions. This is the one that's typically led by internal IT leadership. It could be the manager level, director level. There are different titles that operate at this level. The takeaway here is IT leadership should not also be your enterprise risk leader. We need to have that division. This enterprise level decides what to do about risk. The second, the security program decides how it gets done. Both jobs are necessary.
Thanks, Josh. So I hope we haven't scared you too much, but now we're going to talk about a couple case studies that are particularly relevant for our industry here in the 3PL space. The first that we've chosen to cover is fairly well known, and it's a top 5 global forwarder. The day they were attacked, they took themselves offline. So up until now, we've talked about this very abstract risk, and now we're talking about specific examples that have hit very close to home. And if it can happen to a top 5 forwarder who is sophisticated and well-resourced, then none of us should assume that we're too big or too careful to be impacted. So the headline here is not just the total amount of losses and remediation, which totaled, according to current records, over $60 million. But what's, I think, particularly interesting and important for us to emphasize here is the impact that had, where a longtime customer has taken legal action against this forwarder due to failed SLA performance or missed SLA performance, essentially holding the forwarder liable for refunds, expedited shipping, legal fees. So the complaint was not about the attack itself, but rather what the impact of the necessary response to that attack was, and the effects on this retailer. Now, what is the lesson here? What's the real takeaway? Because again, this is a big, scary example. And what I would say is this. It's not if, it's when. And your readiness decides if it's a disruption or a disaster. So how we work through potential scenarios with our leadership team in advance of when we actually need to execute that readiness response helps us to, if the day comes, when the day comes, make confident and informed decisions based on readiness and in practice. So this is the difference between a bad week and an existential threat, is readiness is in your control even when the attack is not. Now, the next example that we've chosen to share is a little different because this is one of those where it's not us, it's a vendor. But again, remember, think back to an earlier comment I made, is that we are only as secure as those who are also impacting us in their levels of security. So last time it was about our incident. Now it's arguably scarier. It's about a company that we work with, a vendor. And in this attack, this vendor's impact to our business can be paramount. So in this case, this took several customers down for several days. And what I would say that the core takeaway here in this case, as an example, is the impact will land on you. The prep work you do is the same. Contracts, continuity planning, and a tested response allow us to plan for the possibility of this happening, but really to find the gaps before our customers do and not during a peak. So we map the dependency. We know what platforms have to come back first. We know how long we can run. And what our dependency is on that tool allows us to determine what would our response be. Can we trigger into manual mode? That's our recovery time objective. What will it take to get up and running manually, and how long can we do that? That's our business continuity plan. And those are the kinds of things we at the executive level need to be thinking about. So now what? Hopefully we haven't scared you. Hopefully you're still with us. And now we're going to talk about what a good defensible program looks like. You'll hear us say the word defensible quite a bit, but now it is, how do we build a program that protects us when it can, allows us to return to normal operations swiftly, allows us to limit the impact of an attack or an incident? 5 questions every executive should be able to answer. Now, this is the take back slide for you and your executive team. 5 questions. The ask is simple. If answering any one of these questions is hard, that difficulty is the takeaway. I want you to walk through this with your teams. And I want you to mark every spot where you can't give a clear named answer in under 60 seconds. That hesitation tells you where the gap is. So ask these 5 questions, pose each, and then say what a good answer would look like. First, who by name owns cyber and digital risk at the C level, and where does it show up on the standing board or leadership agenda? If the answer is IT handles that, that's a red flag. Risk ownership has a name and a seat at the leadership table. Next, which recognized standard are we aligned to, and can the leadership team say it in one sentence without consulting IT? So are we a NIST aligned organization, CIS, ISO 27001? Whatever our framework is, if leadership can't name it, the program isn't grounded in one we actually own. Next, what are our top 3 cyber risks? What could each one cost us? And are they trending down or just being listed? And this is where we go back to Josh's comment around a risk register. A risk register that never changes is really just a filing cabinet. We need to see movement. So how are we looking at that risk register as action-oriented and making the necessary changes to impact and influence and ultimately to reduce our level of risk? When did our leadership team last sit through an incident tabletop, and how long can the operation run in its downtime context? So this is that case study all over again. This is us taking it, looking in the mirror and saying, do we know that manual operating window before the day we need to execute? Do we know our business continuity plan? And lastly, who tells leadership the company is secure? And do they also build and run the technology? So this is that, does IT grade its own homework? And again, we're not at all saying that IT isn't responsible for it. We're simply saying this is that check and balance around separation of duties, and that the person grading security is not the same person who built it. This gives us that independent assurance. Now, I don't want you to feel disheartened if you couldn't answer any of these, and I certainly don't want you to aim to answer all 5 of them perfectly today. No one can. But the value is in the gaps that this exercise surfaces, and then allowing us as a leadership team to pick the 1 or 2 that become our priorities to attack first. So Josh, talk us through what it looks like to have a defensible cyber and risk program.
Thanks, Angela. And there's that word again, defensible. And I think that's, when we say that, we don't just mean externally, although that is important. That's also, as you mentioned, Angela, from the senior leadership all the way down to the lower staff level, that we know that we are grounded in best practices and the hard work that's going in are towards the right thing. So just to give context to what we mean by that, I think taking a step back from Angela's great introduction to the concepts here and the questions that we're asking you to socialize and surface. As we talked about at the beginning, risks continue to accelerate in 2026. We were talking about some 2025 metrics. Angela and I were talking before this, and we decided not to include also the 2026 because our goal here isn't to scare everyone. That being said, we are trending further into the risk category. Things are accelerating. The volume and velocity of these incidents, and this is probably not news to you. You've probably seen it in the news and in your discussions and forums, are increasing. And just like AI is a huge enabling factor for us and the work we do, unfortunately, it's also the same for those who are trying to attack us. One of the key concepts that we'll talk about here is we can't defend against everything equally. And today, unfortunately, as much as I would love to, we can't talk about everything today. We don't have enough time. So the core foundations, the questions that Angela introduced, and that we're going to talk about next in more detail, are what we view as the critical nexus for a mature and defensible program. And if these are areas of strength, and if we're building them to be areas of strength where they're not, it will flow down to the rest of the program. The other point that I would just make here is that these are not stages to graduate through. These are 5 foundational pillars that all need to be operating concurrently and are important. And a significant gap in any one of those puts us into more risk than we are comfortable with. That's why we're going to spend time talking about them next, and just briefly to surface them, and then we'll talk about them in more detail, aligned to the questions that Angela was just asking. The first one is really altitude. It's often at the wrong layer when we talk about cyber and risk, as we mentioned, but it's who leads and at what level, and that enterprise level risk. The second, is Angela mentioned, is framing it, and that's ensuring that we're grounding ourselves in a standardized framework that is defensible, that's engineered for our team's success, that's well tested with best practices. The next is going to be visibility. We can't protect against what we can't see. We can't make decisions, and we can't make certainly the right decisions if we're not presented with the right risk information. Angela already talked about what happens when incident response goes wrong. So we're going to talk about how it goes right and what that looks like when it's well structured. And then the last piece, as we've talked about, is the independence. And in that context, the independent risk voice that is different from the technology and operations. And summarizing just the defensible program, where we want to be positioned so this flows down the way that we need it to protect our business, our workforce, our reputation, our clients, our partners, is all 5 of these integrated, owned by leadership at the top level. The first pillar that we'll talk about is, as we mentioned, is leadership accountability at the enterprise level. And that's for a reason. And the altitude, you keep hearing me use the word altitude, and that's because we see it at the incorrect layer so frequently. Everything else that we talk about, everything else in the program from the bottom up, is more likely to fail if we get this wrong. The principle is simple. It's cyber and digital risk is enterprise risk. It is business risk. And leadership and senior leadership needs to own it the same way and think about it the same way that we own financial risk and operational risk in operations. This is different from the IT security program leadership that is the detail level, the technical controls, and the how-to. We need to ensure that ownership of that at that senior level isn't a status report from IT that you see monthly or quarterly or with the board that has a lot of green check marks or things that consistently go well. If our only connection is the occasional slider report or when things go wrong, we've designed risk into our system instead of designing it out. The failure mode here is the role confusion that we're talking about. And as Angela mentioned, these are well-intentioned leaders. They're smart individuals who are trying to do the right thing. However, clear roles and ownership are what, time and time again, are actually able to mitigate this. And this means that senior leadership also needs to know the right questions to ask in those positions so that you can be sure that you're receiving the right information to make those decisions.
All right, Josh, I'm going to pause you. I can't resist the urge to ask a question. Why do executive teams struggle with this, knowing that this is sort of that first step this is the most critical element to starting to build that defensible program. Why do we struggle?
There's no one answer to that, but there's a few that we see time and time again. So one is going to be knowing the questions to ask. And oftentimes, that cyber and technology, first of all, it can be viewed as just cyber and technology. And when it's done well, that's translated into information that leadership can consume. And it's not leadership's job to do that translation. You know, if you have the right people managing that, if they're able to translate it for you, so you understand their information coming to you. And as a leadership group, you don't feel that you're in a difficult position to ask the questions because you're not understanding the information as it's being presented. I think the second piece here is there is a level of trust, and we know that we hire good people, and we feel like the questioning attitude or having it live elsewhere is not putting the right trust into them, and that's actually not the right way. Just the same way that we certainly trust our CFOs, but we still have external audits. It's the same concept from an IT perspective. I think the last element that we see all the time is just capacity. Senior leadership is so involved with operations and finances and and critical decisions that oftentimes you try to shift this to other areas, and historically it could live there, but that's not the case now. The risk milieu, the risk environment has completely changed since 2015, and certainly even since COVID and in the 2020s. So those all create risk more than they solve them at this point.
All right, you ready to go to pillar number 2?
Let's do it. So here we're talking about methodology and best practices and how we ground ourselves. So this is, how do we know that we are doing the right things? We can't do everything. We can't invest infinitely. And even those who have the money to do something close to that still get attacked. So this is really focusing in on how do we focus the limited resources that we have so that we have the most defensible, best positioned safeguards in place. How do we add instant credibility to our program? How do we establish the guardrails that our team operates in? The core principle here is these frameworks are designed to be scalable. So whether 5 million up to a 500 million and beyond enterprise can use these same frameworks. We don't change frameworks based on scale. The efficacy is in place with these frameworks. They are well tested, they're battle tested, best practices, and they're current. They're continually updated so that we don't have to worry about what we are missing because we haven't experienced it. We know that these frameworks are adapting to what the industry has seen and is being flowed down to us.
I love that you highlight that this scales, because I think so often we hear people say, I'm too small. Who would want to, attack me? Who would want the data I'm sitting on? And I think that there's a core takeaway here that no one organization is too large or too small. Bad actors don't discriminate. It's, again, economies of scale. How much are you willing to pay to get access back to your system? And that's, there is no, discernment in the targeting necessarily. So having an appropriately scaled program or framework, there is no too large or too small. And this is sort of one of those, wearing a seatbelt, so to speak.
That's exactly right.
All right. Third pillar.
From pivoting here, visibility. So also crucial here. We can't manage risks that we can't see. It's the visibility that drives the decision making. We talked about what this looks like when it's done poorly, right? So that's the quarterly report or the periodic report that just has basic information. It's not giving us information that we can act on and make decisions for. Every report should be questioned from a leadership position of, does this help lead to a decision? And if it's not, it's probably not the right information, or at least it should only be a part of what we're being presented to add context to the decision that we're needing to make. The typical report that shows no risk detections or green boxes or things, it's the same report over and over. That's how we know we're doing it wrong when we see that. We need those reports to drive those risk decisions, whether we accept or mitigate or make investment decisions. We talked about what good looks like a little bit already with a risk register, so I won't go too far into that. but really it's socializing what are our top exposures. As leaders are sitting here and hopefully listening to us a little bit is, can you name what your top 3 or 4 risks are that are unique to you and not just true of everyone? We all know, for example, that email phishing is a risk and human behavior. We get that, but what does that actually look like for you? Where are you strong and weak? So it's getting at that level. It's also crucial, and this is another area that we see frequently with clients that we're first engaging with, is that there's a fear or there's a culture to not report our largest risks, and we go with what's safe or what looks good. And so it's really important that leadership encourage and demand that where our greatest risks are is where we're seeing the information. We know that we're going to see things that concern us, but we want to see how that trends over time. And we need that visibility so we can make the critical decisions in a timely way.
For those who are still watching, we actually have a sample. It's not a sample dashboard, so to speak, but it is a sample of what are these questions and elements that we should be looking at or to get us started. So we have that a little later in the deck.
I think the last piece I would add here is the trending, and we want to see how we trend over time. So anytime we look at information that's static or that's not showing historic performance, that also creates a problem. We want to see our greatest risks, and we want to see that we're reducing them over time. We're not expecting to go from 100 to 0 all at once, but we can have confidence that we're making the right decisions, the right investments, that we have the right people doing the right things when we see it trending in the direction to lower that risk. And I think that takes us into how we respond to it when it's not working well. So Angela already highlighted a couple key themes here, which I love. So this is how we are ready for our worst day, potentially. As Angela mentioned, it's not if, it's when. Hopefully this is decades in the future and none of us will be the leadership that is sitting having to deal with it, but it will happen at some point. Angela also mentions, one of the points that I like to really emphasize, which is in that event, whether it's a disruption or a disaster, you're already deciding now with your level of preparation. The other piece I'll mention here is we don't control a lot when it comes to cybersecurity. We can't control who's attacking us and through what technologies and capabilities. We are in full control of our own readiness and how much we invest and emphasize that. So this is the area to make sure we get right. I think Angela had mentioned the Expeditors case, which is where the issue wasn't the attack itself. It was how the incident was handled after, and it was the uncertainty over how long that took. And this is a great example of readiness being the difference and not something you improvise under stress at the time. When this isn't going well, what this looks like is an incident response plan that you have, but no one could tell you how many pages are in it, what sections are in it, what it looks like. It's maybe viewed for a couple minutes in a meeting, but it's not acted on. There's no what we would call a tabletop session, which is where you go through a simulated incident and you see where there are failure points in the plan or the training of the team. Focusing on readiness is one of the most essential things that you can do as a leader on behalf of your business. And this is an area to ensure that both you and your team are comfortable as well positioned. This includes a couple key elements, and there's a couple acronyms here, so I'll try to avoid them. But the incident response plan itself, this is the guide that tells us what we should be doing so we're not making it up. If we're making it up at the time or we don't pull it out, we're going to make mistakes. There should be a trained security incident response team. This shouldn't just be general IT and we'll just pull whoever happens to be at the desk into the incident. This is a team who knows the incident response plan back to back, who is trained expressly to deal in these high stress situations. There's also a business continuity plan. I won't go into more detail because Angela already explained that, but that's our failure mode. What do we do when our IT systems are offline? And critically, the RPO, the recover point objective, for how long do those downtime processes have to operate for? they have to line up, and oftentimes they don't, or they're not tested. So we're just guessing. We don't want to do that. And then the last piece is the tabletop that we talked about. We want to make sure we're doing that at least annually, and it should be taken very seriously and not just a 30-minute session where we talk about, do we know where the incident response plan is? And then the last point, the independence, and we referenced this a bit. It's crucial to have the separate and independent risk voice that keeps the other four pillars honest. And that's not honest in the sense that someone would intentionally mislead. There's differences in focus and purpose, in training and expertise. And you want to drive healthy conflict between those leaders. So you have those separate voices as a senior leader to make the best decision. The risk voice has one job and the expertise and background for it, and that's to translate the technical risk into the business decisions. Both roles are crucial, but they do need to be separate. I think probably the biggest challenge point that Angela, you and I typically hear here is, well, we don't need a full-time chief information security officer. We don't need a CISO at all. There's not one way to solve this, and the position doesn't have to be full-time. There are a lot of ways to tackle this that Angela and I talk frequently with leaders about, that's scaled and fits the organization. The key point here is that there's that independence within the organization and the separation of voice, so that we have the risk discussions that we need to have and that we can't have without it. I will also just call out the most current frameworks that we talked about aligning to, like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF. Their most current version, 2.0, placed governance and that risk-based independent voice front and center at the very top of everything else because of how important it is. So this isn't just Angela and I saying this. This is the consensus of the industry because of the gaps that everyone has seen over time when that's not done through that approach.
All right, folks, we're in the home stretch. What does validation of this look like? What are our next steps? We promised you, we want you to walk out of here not feeling scared, but feeling prepared to go make decisions and have conversations really with your leadership teams around how you begin protecting or continue protecting your organization and putting some real things in place. So as promised, this is that carry forward, the practical companion to our See It pillar. And this is a sample of the questions that we believe you should be asking. Now, the Right report does not list every one of these or every metric contained within these broad headers. This is a menu on a checklist. Do not try to report on all of them at once. Pick the ones that are most imperative to our business and start monitoring, measuring, and setting some benchmarks for how we're going to improve. So again, they shouldn't all be green, and they certainly shouldn't all be red and stay red. It's about making those intentional decisions. So first we talk about enterprise risk exposure. This is that risk register. Risk register is very simply acknowledging risk, putting some numbers to it, putting some indicators to it, and evaluating where do we need to mitigate first, and then putting action to that. We've talked about potentially a heat map or some residual risk versus appetite. So where are we carrying risk? If we say we have low risk tolerance, but we're carrying high risk, then our appetite does not align with what we're seeing. So we suggest that we review this regularly and make those decisions accordingly. Next, we're talking about the threat landscape. So it's attacks versus actual compromises here. How many times did we block the bad actors? Or what is our sector seeing in terms of bad actors? Or are there new threat types coming toward our sector? So again, this is a nice trend chart for us to monitor. Next, we talk about the effectiveness of our security controls. So this is that return to operations or time to remediation rates. This allows us to report out on when we have actually encountered an incident. How did we respond? We talk about vulnerability management and exposure management. So again, understanding what is our time to remediate critical elements that we identify on our vulnerability indicators. This allows us to be a bit more quantitative than qualitative. Sometimes we talk about risk and appetite; those feel very qualitative, and this we're trying to drive into where there's some real quantitative measures. Next, we talk about the regulatory and compliance status. So, how are we performing against our framework? What is our real level of maturity? Are we monitoring our maturity? We should look at our investment. So, cost versus risk reduction, and is our investment helping us to truly move what counts or move what we're measuring? We talked about RTO and RPO versus our targets. So that's when we get into that incident readiness and resilience. There are a lot of acronyms on here. I'm happy to try to create maybe even a chart for you if necessary. And lastly, we have our human risk. And this is certainly not the least of our concerns. Candidly, this is the one we find a lot of folks are tackling and tackling really effectively. But I do think that there is always more we can do, because we talk about how one simple click opens the door for bad actors. And so having a keen eye on our phishing failure rates, our training program, our completion, our anomalies, trending by department, understanding that we're not looking for an average here. We're really looking for a downward trend in number of clicks, an increase in the number of folks who report a phishing test and they identify it, and it really increased awareness for our people. So our people are our first line of defense, and we have to train them appropriately and give them the tools to be part of our defense mechanism. All right. So next steps. I want you to walk out of here, or close out of this webinar, and be thinking about how are you going to validate the owner of your cyber program or your enterprise risk program. You're going to put one executive and name them the accountable party for cyber and digital risk, and you're going to put that in writing. Their name goes on the org chart, not a to-do list, and that's a this week item. Next, I want you to run that test, to go through those 5 questions. And again, don't be uncomfortable if you can't answer any of them, but pick 1 or 2 that you are committed to answering within the next, I'm suggesting, week. I want you to check your insurance and confirm that you can actually meet your cyber insurance and contract conditions. Most expect a lot, but here we've listed some examples: MFA, EDR, backups, and a tested incident response plan. So validate that if audited, you could satisfy the expectations of your policy. Get a baseline. Run a NIST security risk assessment. Find out score the maturity of your functions and find out where you perform against the standard, and prioritize the risks that matter. And lastly, put some leadership over it. Stand up senior independent cyber and risk leadership. This can be fractional, this can be full-time, this can be an executive that's already part of your team, but create leadership and give someone the accountability, the responsibility, and the capability to deliver just that. Josh, I'm going to have you take us through our key capabilities validation checklist.
So I think high level here, probably not be redundant, is establishing the key roles that we talked about, who is accountable and responsible, and it's really focusing in on the separation between the IT program and the enterprise level risk. We talked about the risk register and how we lead, how we govern, risk appetite. So these are terms of art. I think we'll include some additional details here for those that are diving into that, but there's some. They sound difficult, but they're not. These are really simple tools that add the visibility and the ability to lead the way that we're talking about without having to invest a ton of time. We talked about the third piece here, the independence, the separate voice. A lot of ways to do that well, but absolutely crucial, as well as the visibility. And it's really looking at what data are you being presented with. And Angela, I'm thinking back now through all the clients that we initially onboard. I can't think of one who had the visibility to leadership that really they needed to make the decisions. And, within the initial couple of weeks of engagement, the amount of information that started to transition and sort of leadership was able to really engage in ways that they couldn't. So I'd really lean into 4 as a gateway into a lot of really good conversations that I think you'll find. We talked about the resilience and that risk occur continually. the need to be ready. And again, I think the key highlight here is that that is one of the few areas of cybersecurity that we fully own and are responsible for. And so we can make the decision without any other influence to make sure that we're fully ready. And so we need to do that. And then we talked about the examples and cases where the third-party supply chain, of which we are a part and also have and rely on, trusted partners as well. We can do everything right. We can follow all these steps, and we can have a program that we are incredibly proud of. And one of our trusted partners lets the attacker in the side door. And so it's crucially important that we have that vendor risk management as a part of that ecosystem that we talked about.
Fantastic. All right, folks, that's all for us today. If you have any questions that we haven't answered, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to engage by email or set up some time to chat. Again, this is not about being frightened. This is about being prepared and making decisions that are best for ourselves, our business, and our customers. That's all for us.
Angela, Joshua, thank you very much. It was a very eye-opening presentation. We'll go ahead and close. And as Angela said, you can reach out to her or Joshua directly, or you can email any questions you may have to us at education@iwla.com, and we'll see that they receive your questions. So again, thank you to our speakers, our presenters, and thank you to those attending. You'll be receiving the link from today's webinar video along with the PowerPoint presentation. So again, thank you very much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.